I don't usually build paper airplanes, but when I do, they mean something to me. The Howard DG A6 Mr. Mulligan. 2 scales. This one is 139. This one is 1:59. Mr. Mulligan won the Bendix Trophy in 1935. That would have been halfway through the first decade of my father's life. It also carried branding from Gulf Oil. Gulf Oil was the company my father retired from. His last position was pretty highly placed in public relations. He was responsible for everything on the Texas side of the Mississippi. One day my father came home, he brought me this airplane kit. The box seemed to go on forever. That was the first moment I heard of the Mr. Mulligan. It was a beautiful balsa wood kit that was so far beyond my capabilities I never really did anything substantive with it. But I kept that thing and I loved it on it for years. Out of my life, lost, gone, and then recently I was watching a gentleman build a beautiful little jet aircraft from the 50s. And his source was Fiddler's Green. Being a person who follows up on folks who make things out of paper and papercraft in general, I went to fiddlersgreen.net. It is a beautiful resource for endless number of aircraft, some cute little buildings, and some other patterns. It's a pay site, and you should pay for that work. This guy Chip Finn, at some point, seems to have authored the Mr. Mulligan kit. Well, Mr. Mulligan, and now here I have the chance to do what my 12-year-old self couldn't do, so away we went. We'll go through the 59 scale, we'll go through the 39 scale, and I'll show you how I did it. Probably the last one on the channel, but this one is special. Mr. Mulligan, meet the parts. This is the directions sheet from the fiddlersgreen.net kit. The author of this kit may be Chip Finn. He administers the Fiddler's Green site. They're worth a look. They have a tremendous library of aircraft paper patterns. Got a nice elevation here and directions. The kit itself is really easy to assemble. Take his advice about where to score, where not to score, how to fold. It will help the overall execution of the aircraft. When you buy the kit for $5, you get the kit in a smaller scale and the kit in a larger scale. The small scale kit has everybody on one page. Fuselage, engine, side elevation, wings, all together in one place. It's a quick, easy afternoon build. In fact, I did exactly that to do the Plastico, which you see here. The greater proportion of the kit is the other 2 of 3 pages excluding the directions. 1 page, exact same parts, bigger build of the fuselage and the wings. If I lay them out together, the parts look pretty familiar. That's the whole kit. As to adhesives, we have more or less the usual suspects. Everybody knows what this is. The tackiness is your friend. So we use it liberally, and of course we love the fact that you can set the bottle down and it'll be right there. You don't have to shake it to get where you want to go. More on this in a minute. You know what that is and you know who makes it. This glue stick has an interesting and very valuable feature, which I'll get back to. Liquid CA for tacking, gel CA for more permanent quick bonds. As to paper, scrap of 160-pound bonds, front cover of a cookie box. You can see that that stuff's thinner, but also cardboard. 1.2 mil matte and gloss matte board. Not best for the struts for the small scale, better for the struts for the large scale. Now what's so special about that glue? We're going to get the important stuff out of the way so that we don't eke it up. A little eye candy there. You know how this works, right? You open it up, it's tacky glue. It's roll-on glue. The antiperspirant of adhesives. Look at that. That'll scare the boogers out of you. Until you find out that while it goes on, purple, just like certain brands of wall spackle, it will disappear. That's disappearing purple ink. You might be able to see it fade a little bit as it just sits there and stares at you. But I promise you there are no purple goobies left over anywhere after you use this. I'm digging it because it helps me know that I have covered the entire surface of a part before I bond it. I got, I think, two big sticks of it. I will look for it preferentially in the future. You know, see there? It's gone. Abso-freaking-lutely gone. This stuff is the shiznits. And the final small one will have additional detail around the windows, additional detail on the fairing, better prop. I will try to thread the wires. One thing I didn't notice in the kit anywhere is these lateral struts that are in the center of these struts here. Yeah, we'll make them out of something. Here's the fuselage separated from its sprue and partially decorated for assembly. I have the part itself, the starboard interior for the windows to give it detail, the port interior for the windows to give it detail. This and this are gussets to support these joints. They're somewhat weak here near the landing gear pylons. This hides the nacelle seam. Just this many of these ribs have been scored lightly. This has been scored strongly so that it all folds in place. We're going to color up the corners a little bit here and there and then assemble it. This is what's going to be used to make this happen. You know this guy, you know this guy. Clear PVA, canopy glue. To decorate the fuselage, my favorite watercolor pencils. And I found colors which match almost precisely to the eye for the various parts of this entire color scheme. So they're in place, ready to go. Implements of destruction. Don't throw them all over the bench, you hurt yourself. Implements of destruction. Some of that, some of that. Some of that, some of that. Fingernail file. Cheap file for paper. Very, very good. This is the best sharpener I have ever found for matte pencils and watercolor pencils. It doesn't break them off, and it makes a really fine point, and that's really valuable here. Now, you know, these are there, but we won't talk about it much. First things first, I'm going to decorate the edges in classic style. Many of these have already been done. I have not done the port windows. So, standard stuff. The point on this is not as fine as it should be, but I think it'll be adequate for this purpose. Watercolor pencil, as you may be able to see, goes on fast and strong. The wax pencil, I'd be whittling down the edges trying to accomplish this. Sometimes I get a little rollover, and so I want to go back on this side. Doesn't look like it, but I'm being careful not to get that pencil where it doesn't belong. You can always erase watercolor pencil very quickly too. So we'll continue that process through the other edges. This color for the dark, it's already been done here. The orange works very well, and then I have a lighter blue. A lot of that's been done. I'm going to go across it before I actually do the assembly. I'm going to go around it and make sure that it's good to go. These guys go inside and give you depth. This will be the tab that mounts it, and it's arranged such that it won't interfere. I have a little additional handle that can go right in this spot. That'll raise it up a little bit. And you can see the weakness. When you look at it this way, you can see the weakness. There, right there, to right there. The distance between this point and this point is tiny. And when this folds back against this and everybody's pulled up in a U shape, that gets weak. So I put a gusset behind it. I would just reach into the empty nacelle, slap a gusset in there. These will be folded back on each other with the squarest possible joint I can make. That is the first part of making a very square wing joint here, so that there's no gap all the way across this point. I'm going to go through a time lapse, let you watch this process, and we'll take a look at the result. We have an assembled fuselage. We have depth to the windows. And my little handle there. Those are for the landing gear pylon. That's for the braces later. Same on the starboard side. That ain't round. That ain't round for a reason. When the round engine goes on this, you'll get some very nice profiles around here. Got the Gulf logo. The folks who built this aircraft originally ended up going all the way to Grumman Aircraft, and then from there all the way to Northrop Grumman, a company which I know quite a bit about. And that's backwards. We'll just pretend we don't know that. Gussets in here, gussets in here. The tail will pinch together and receive the tail assembly, and the wing will go into the rest of this gap on the top. One more gusset. All about making this the flattest flat you can get so that there's no gap when you lay the wing on. 1.1 millimeter mat board. I cut it, but that's grist for the laser mill all the time. You see, this was once the sprue for a part. This is not square. Skinnier here than it is here. Rocket science, not required. but it does need to fit snugly. Here's my biggest dimension. And pun intended, we're winging. There's my smallest dimension. Pretty close. There's marks. Of course, there's one dimension I forgot. Now I have a length. The longer the line, the less the error. So this is closer to square because I'm using that long line than if I did the short side. Works everywhere. Ballistics, blah, blah, blah. I'll probably have a little error here, but I want to transfer that point. Transfer this point. I don't care about that saddleback on the back of the part, but we'll probably put it in just for artistic sense. Okay, now that needs to fit nice and friendly in here. It will get a twin. The twin will be up in the wing. The whole intent is to force this joint shut, because then when the wing profile gets into action, the windshield fits better where it belongs. And it's something fit and finish, man. You want those gaps to go away. Seen me do this a million times. The more I hold, the less I can cut. And I'm being real careful this time. I'm just taking it a slice at a time so I get a better edge on the part. Not necessary, just OCD. Be better if I cut this the other way. I just did it this way. My calibrated eyeball usually runs a little large, as it is doing. Two methods to deal with that. This being the fastest. Now, don't get any better than that. Actually, we're going to use the second method. Paper rolls up, doesn't go away. So I knocked it. You can see I'm knocking the edges off. And this is an old file, so the grit's better on the butt. I want it to come all the way up to the windscreen, which it now does very handily, thank you. And this one's short enough, I'm not going to bother with the saddlebag. So now we're down to the whole point. Might be a touch much. Doors and corners. Make sure you get the edges. And remember, your fingers might get gooey. All right, that is so close it makes no difference. Got some glue sticking out there, but it's already curing. The whole point of this is that edge. I don't care about the gap in the middle. And some of that's just going to disappear because that's glue flex. PVA wets paper, then cures. Wet stays in the paper, and its curing process is intimately involved with the removal of said water. So a lot of times those gaps will just suck up when it cures. This is water's gone, and it's down to the inherent water content of the paper. There's a fuselage. Again, that's going to get pinched. Of two minds, I could glue it now, but actually I don't dare glue it now. A little foreshadowing. This goes in there and gets pinched to get held shut. That's the rudder. Next up, an engine. Probably build the landing gear at the same time. Next up on the plate is the motor. This big 9-cylinder Wasp takes up the entire front end of the aircraft. Is way more detailed than it needs to be because you can only see about 10% of it. You know that I've already cut up into shreds the modern colored version. This is a original page for the large scale. Page 1 again. We have a series of things. You can see here the difference in my recolor and the original. I've simply improved the detail and made it consistent and clear. The cowl we'll bring into the picture in a minute. Down here, it's a new hub, cleaned up, and I've already cut. Look, I've already cut a replaced motor, and you'll see that I profiled the cylinders and cleaned them up, redid the whole thing, so that when this is put together, the profiled motor will be more obvious inside the cowl. We've had an interesting journey with the exhaust ring, and it's the motor mount, the exhaust ring. That's the original part, fair to partly cloudy. This is a replacement. You see much crisper detail. And again, most of that's going to be hidden by the cowl. So when I redid this exhaust ring, I ended up cutting it into 3 pieces to make it fit. That's all standard stuff. You see me made more frustums than you ever wanted to see, so be it. Here we go with the engine again in closer detail. The tabs are superfluous, so I cut them off. This is the respin uncut. Find a little pre-prepared piece. That tab will help us to get a good cylinder. the ultimate shape for this engine block is a circle here, a circle here. The cone fits in under it to that depth. Then the whole thing goes on. And you see some of the result. What we end up with is the frustum in the bottom, modified such that it fits the forward end of the aircraft. A center bulkhead there, cut out in the center so I could manipulate it. You saw the cylinder of paper in the middle that sets the depth for this. So this depth is set. And we have our formed cylinders and our shaft cone in the middle. Finally, the prop shaft. The whole rig fits on the fuselage. That spot right there is the center. That'll go down with PVA and be teased into place until it fits all the way around. And you begin to see some of those subtle curves actually present on the aircraft that give it its distinctive historical shape. And so it all forms up very nicely. So we'll glue that in. I mean, there's no rocket science there. You just glue it in and pray. And next up, some wings. No, you're not looking down the barrel of a kaleidoscope, nor is this a butterfly. These are the tailplanes. This is the rudder. These are the landing gear struts, pre-cut. All of this is instructive to how you would construct a wing. So we'll do this first. The short story goes like this. None of this is scored for a reason. We're going to bend them around a form and then glue them on their edge because everything's going to have a profile when it's done. So bend there, bend there, bend there, and finally here. A couple other brief things about these. I have pre-cut the holes for the cables. I have some ideas about improving the cables over the last iteration on both all the surfaces, all three surfaces, and the fuselage. You begin to see the sense of not gluing the fuselage when you see this. So that's the final part of the diamond of the cabling that will go around the various locations. There's the motor mounted onto the firewall. That's 9.5 out of 10, I think. And we see, again, the improved detail in the front. I'm still convinced that the lighter gray is appropriate back here because you get to see the detail. So the fuselage is waiting. It's ready for its windshield and its wing. The landing struts will go in here. To land the plane, pun intended, watching this happen will teach you what we're going to do with the big wing. Finished tailplanes, finished rudder, finished landing gear struts. You see that what we get is a profile, a nice aerodynamic curve. And that's because we did not do a hard edge here. Let it curl over and then let it naturally bring itself into a more pointy kind of a configuration. On this surface, as I was assisting the cure by pressing it together and rubbing, I did it against a flat surface and I got a very flat profile. If all goes well, we get a little bit of this when it goes into the fuselage, rear of the fuselage. You saw that I filed the edges and then colored them. Still not utterly completely satisfied with that coloring. I'm trying to get all the white out of it. And I made sure that any surface that would be visible would be colored. That will probably have to be trimmed right there to go onto the fuselage. So before it actually gets assembled, it'll get a little bit more of this love. Then the aerodynamic struts. Didn't do a real good at flattening those out either. I'll work that harder before they're assembled. The idea of not scoring it and not making it tight gives you that aerodynamic surface. So next up we get to a wing. Everything you saw here is going to be applied to the wing with some additional subtleties. The wing gets these marvelous curves, which is just, I mean, man, is it worth the price of admission. And that shows the subtle design applied by the gentleman who made this pattern. It looks simple, it looks crude. It is absolutely not. There is some very attentive stylistic elements in this that really make it reflect the actual aircraft. So we're winging it. Page 2 of 3. Page 1 and 2 are the larger scale. Page 3, of course, is the smaller scale. This is the original color. My recolor has the Gulf livery on it. Closest color I can get. I prefer to have it darker, I think. I've done a couple other things. Improved the tail part, made the bumps for the cowl, and made a better representation of the true way that these struts attach to the bottom of the wing. Those are the uppy downies, which I don't have an example of right here. So we're going to cut this, score here, score here, score here, score here. Everything else is cut. There's a wing. I forgot to talk about why you saw me put a plate right here. The plate there ensures that this join will be as precise as possible and nearly eliminates gaposis. They're pretty good laying out the wings. Might be a little bit of CA tucked along an edge somewhere, and then some trimming and coloring. Probably coloring before the CA so that the glue doesn't prevent the pencil. But there we go. See that subtle aerodynamic curve? And that's because these planes are just different enough in just the right way to provide that curve. And I'm really impressed by that. I don't know how the gentleman figured out that math. Sure would like him to tell me. From here, we'll be joining things up to get a whole fuselage, and talking about how to these and these and all the other gee whiz. In this iteration, this cable is beautiful, but it seems to me somewhat thin. So I'm going to try and figure out a way to do two things. If I have some gray thread, I'm going to twist a couple of strands of thread to give it a little bit, just a touch more substance. And see how that works out. And the cable captured between these two parts was effective as all spit, and in the end disappeared. Next is probably joining the two assemblies, and then we move on to the smaller bits and pieces. I prefer to let this cure and wait so that I can assure myself of the best bond there. And the biggest part of that bond is all about how that windshield is going to mate around here. The original pattern has this extra profile, which you can see in some tiny places right there, perhaps under by my finger. I just eliminated it, so there's one tiny bit of stuff that just won't happen. And maybe this time we get, in fact, I've even considered, now that all of this is formed, starting before bonding the wing by placing the windshield. And we may ultimately do that. I need to test some things. But if I do that, I'm given the opportunity of clearing up the windshield gaps significantly before placing the wing. So I think that's probably what's going to happen. All right, I'm digging it. I'm really digging it. I mean, this is historically accurate, dramatic and beautiful. This is more dramatic. I learned volumes, just volumes, using Inkscape to recolor this thing. And improve the pattern a little bit. And I'm not shy to admit I may very well send along some of the recolored stuff to the gentleman who originally designed it and said, hey, all yours, bud. There we go. Let's see what happens next. I have here a mess of little bits. That's material to do some more of this. That's material to do some more of that. More on that in a minute. I have a prop. We fold it in half. We do some detail in the center. Ready to go. That is an uncut motor fairing. That is a cut motor fairing. We'll fold that up. And these little bumps will go in the classic place where the bumps are on the fairing. You saw me cut these earlier. That is the fairing for the landing gear. You'll see that folded up and prepped. You saw in the time lapse a bunch of bits and pieces be created. Here's an explanation of what I did. Starting with the cowl. I got about 3/4 of the way through the cowl in the time lapse and gave up. I screwed it up. So I fell back 10 yards and punted. I have now completed one. trust me, you did not want to watch me even on time lapse make each of these tedious little divots and glue them in place. A little bit of color in the back, a little bit of color in the front to, you know, blend in whatever will be visible from the exterior. The drill here goes like this. You start, this is the bottom, and you can see that there's a little bit of a D shape here. That appears to be natural to the aircraft. So two different sides of the way these things fold over. So you have it cut, and you start here at the top, a dab of CA on the inside of the flap with no tab, move the tabs over, hold them in place, squish them with a pair of crimpers of some kind, pliers, what have you, move to the next. And when I did it, I started, you know, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, all the way around until I got down near to the bottom, at which point I do the back part of that seam, leave these two as free as absolutely possible. I folded them way back so they wouldn't get glue on them. Then I do the remainder of these and wrap up. So granted, that's not a butt joint. It's also on the bottom of the aircraft. And you can see I got a hickey or two. So there's our cowl. A little bit more like the real thing. Those gray dots on the white one there are intended as indications of the bumps. I don't think they're functional, but they appear to be very iconic to this aircraft. That's a cowl, complete with the later Pratt & Whitney logo. Redid the Mulligan logo. I've got a SVG of it now, so I can do whatever I want with it. There we go, that's that. We've seen the tailplanes and the rudder. Know what they're about. These are the cowls for the landing struts. And that one, you can see that on the camera, that's where I actually signed the aircraft. On the original, you'll see something about, you know, body by Fisher, essentially. And I replicated that by just putting my name on it. How did I do these guys? They're laminated, printed color, so that the color would be consistent. Laminated it onto a cracker box. I file this stuff before I glue it because the wax content is through the roof. And I use the magic purple glue. Probably better to use something a little bit more robust. I cut them out. We go from there with the magic paint pen on the edges. These colors match, although this dries a little darker. So I have these guys. I've made these guys one side a little thinner, one side a little thicker. This part of the strut's a little thinner, this little part is a little thicker. These are intended as a base for the struts, and they are present on the actual aircraft. Indeed, there is a similar aerodynamic structure around here, which I'm not going to replicate. Windshield, I got two here just because I've redone the edges. Probably go back into it with a paint pen a little bit. One or another of these is going to go on. However, I have now decided that this must be applied after the wing. The prop, there is no rocket science here, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to fold that over, glue it up tight. Two pieces of half round styrene and ribbons of paper wrapped around the edges will complete the prop. The prop will look, make sure he's in focus. The prop will look like that. I'm going to try and do a little better with that circle next time, or simply omit it altogether, one of the two. Landing gear nacelle. See where my paint scheme fell flat? I'm just going to retcon that. We're going to say it's going to be like that. When they start out, they look like this. You saw me cut it. And they get folded over and gently persuaded into place with real consciousness to gaps. This thing's also been filed on the edges and had more wax, not wax, more paint pencil applied to it to hide the places where I filed off the rough edges. And every time I look at it, I think it's more likely to get another coat of that paint pen. So that's kind of where we're at. This is all the little bits and pieces, basically built now more or less as a delay in joining the two major components. We'll join the two major components and then proceed from there. The cables are some of my favorite parts of this. So to me, that thread looks a touch tiny. Ultimately, either I'll obtain some gray thread, so it looks more like steel wire, or I'll double up this black thread, just, need my circumstances, to replicate that. You can see that the wheels are replaced. I'll cut some of those on the laser, cut the right size on the laser, and then you see that I profiled them with a file and then painted them. And those are the centerpieces, which I forget where I got them now. Oh no, I didn't. It's on the pattern. And we'll proceed with the proceedings. So I'm both excited and nervous about joining the two major components. That has to be next up, or we're never going to finish the model. As you see, this time I succeeded in eliminating the gaposes nearly 100%, and we're going to try and replicate that again. Well, here's a tech tip. If you're going to iron a shirt, don't grab the hot part of the iron. That hurt. Here's where we are. I sucked it up and glued in the wings. And I'm actually very happy with the result. You can see just the tiniest bit of gap there near the rear root. On that side, this side's a little separated, but not too bad. And if you put a square on that, it might not be all the way quite square. Pay attention to that. You can tell I got cockeyed right there. I've since modified the recolor pattern. Another thing that occurred to me while I was doing this, and I mentioned it earlier, this part should be above this part, so the tab should be aft, not forward. The same here. That way you get the cab lifted and this cloth covered tail and fuel section below. The next step in this little process probably should be the windshield, but I'm going to go through the rest of the small parts first. We're going to make it some wheels and a prop. Turns out 3 layers of my favorite black laser cut mat board make a wheel. So we'll peel the protective tape off of them, we'll glue them together, we'll sand them round, and come up with something very much like this. And then mount them into the nacelle. Make it look easy. We'll make the prop, detail the hub, cut it. That's the tail wheel. I'm going to make up the tail wheel completely and mount it. I noted earlier that this profile, there's a line right there. That's where the tail wheel goes. So it can be mounted on the tail before you put it in. And that little trivial thing is finished. And you just go slide in and go. From there, we'll do the rest of the assembly and have a finished piece. We are ready to land the plane. Props finished. Wheels are in their nacelles. We have the wheel fairing, the strut fairings for the wheels, underwing braces, the windshield, fuselage, elevators, and rudder. The wheels were laid up with my favorite black mat board and rounded off and stuck in there with their hubs. I like them, pretty effective. Screwed up one prop, so I had to fall back 10 yards of punt, do another one. A couple of enhancements added after the fact. That is a tiny piece of masking tape cut out of the mask for a laser part, and it lays against the hub and looks better than anything I could have done by hand. The hole in the back of the prop, so marked and drilled out. I increased the width of it to better accommodate the toothpick that's on the forward end of the aircraft. So now what we got is that hole should settle down on top of that toothpick. There'll be some mucking about with depth at the last minute. That probably end up getting done off camera. Definitely going to put the windshield on off camera. And we'll do the rest of the full install. The idea is to put things on in an order that doesn't cause them to be vulnerable. So I'm going to do the elevators and the rudder first because nothing else is going to break. Actually, this will be first after the windshield because it doesn't risk anything else putting the windshield on, and it's easier to do with nothing else attached. The very last things to go, the nacelle and the prop. After the wires. So, the very last things will be that thing. We'll have to put the wires in the wheels as we put them on. And then we'll put the wires back here and finally wrap it up with the prop. Give ourselves a whole, honest to God, full and complete airplane. Don't look too close, because this little guy is a freaking hickey fest. Got a hickey on the wing. Of course, that's out of alignment. I'm not real thrilled with this joint right here. Yeah, see the prop just hit the floor. Well, the prop is tough to keep in place because I'm balancing it on the head of a pin, essentially. The windshield this time is a really good fit. If I were going to paint this, I could hide the hickey associated with what I did to get the alignment right on the wheels. So we got glue along those two seams. The wires, I made a really good choice. I went and spent considerable time looking for a slightly thicker gray thread. Wasn't sure I'd hit it, and then I got home and I compared it against the black, which I think here's a thread of it right here. So this is what I used on the original, on the previous, and this is what I've used here. You can see that this is thicker. And even it has a heavier texture, so it looks like cable. When you're in person, this looks like cable. Another hickey. And of course, this is the same model that was assembled before I flipped the Grumman logo. All in all, though, satisfying. Quite so, as a matter of fact. I'll reglue the prop, reglue the rudder, fall back 10 yards, punt a little bit, and see what I can do to hide some of the hickeys. One of the things I thought about doing is I found a photograph of the exhaust ports, venting oil. Not very tight, these motors, and so a lot of oil came out of them even when they were at their peak performance. It's also the exhaust, so if it's running rich or what have you, it's going to leave these trails. So I thought about just trailing it. Maybe we break out a makeup brush and dry brush it. All in all, I got the struts pretty square. There's got to be a better way to do that. The wing is pretty square, although I still think it's a little bit kitty-wumpus. I think it's not quite there. I've corrected the failures in the vector, and what just keeps percolating in my mind is the fact that now that I have SVGs of this, I can scale it up. The only thing that's slowing me down is the fact that I wouldn't have, there would be some sort of visible seam here unless I went full on model airplane and coated it, painted it, covered it. So, I don't know. The design itself is important enough to me, and the challenges that might be associated with that are important enough to me that it might really be something. Let me try something. I'm fishing for tools. Okay. So, the wheels are not quite exactly aligned, but I got them on well enough that that I'm on all 3 points and actually sitting on the landing gear as it should be. A little bit of percussive maintenance here might get this. In fact, that's partially unbonded. That's why it's crooked. So that'll get a touch of CA right in the back, and then that'll straighten it out. While I'm going back to do this again for the umpteenth time, you may have been able to detect in the time lapse how shaky fingered I was. I love the design. I love the livery. Is amazing. Among other things, it's not quite right. So Mr. Flynn's original design is in some ways not quite symmetrical, and of course I've talked about the beautiful curves that give us all of these swoopy doopies to really make it into an aircraft. But I did not apply mathematical precision to this. I just overdid his pattern. And having done that, Some of this is kittywampus. The rudder, pretty good, and I'm really happy with the thread. Although, probably needed to pull it yet again tighter to get a stronger curve, and that's a phenomenon of the thicker thread. I was able to get rid of the ends like I did on the last one. I like it. Say 8 out of 10. Part of it because it was done over time. Part of it because that's the way it came out. And this ended up being a maquette of a maquette of a maquette of a maquette because this is a different design. So, yeah, I'm noticing that's a little crooked there. But, we'll see what we get from that. I'm really thrilled. Chip Finn, thank you very much. Mr. Mulligan is a wonderful kit. Fiddler's Green's an amazing sight. As I said, I'll probably never build another airplane on the channel. This one, just like I never use one word where 2 will do, I never build one thing where 3 would do. That is marvelous. It's not perfect. Got hickeys out the wazoo. One quick look and you can tell that the wheels is cockeyed. That's completely on me. But the overall result, the 4-foot resolution, is fantastic. I like the little additions. They were easy to put in there. I love the dramatic color. There's the original. Beautiful, smooth forms, interesting contours, simplicity of construction. I really dig the wires. And the thing about that, this is the scale of these. This silver thread is going to be used elsewhere in other things. Any place I need a cable for something, it's going to be perfect. Might do another, might not. It's floating around in here that with the SVG I can do it. It's whether I decide I want to or not. Minimally, I've corrected the recolor, and I really need to pass it on to Chip. Say, hey, you want to put that out there too? Next up, got to get back to the space station.